giving economic and social development assistance to Egypt. My question is, in some ways may seem a rather strange one, but do you find that you have any ideological differences with other major donors or countries on this type of assistance? The reason I ask is, back in the early 1990s, I think, for example, Japan was giving advice to many Asian countries on development of their financial and economic systems. And Japan's advice tended to differ very largely from that of, say, the United States. And Japan, in many ways, was right in warning these countries against, for instance, massive capital inflows into their countries. So, as I say, my question is, do you find that you have freedom to say whatever you like, effectively, in these countries, or not?
Well, maybe to be more precise, what I should have said was that this social and economic planning capacity building is really helping the Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation of Egypt. And this is the ministry that is in charge of the planning itself, of social and economic development of the country. And our experts of planning are the ones that have gone to this ministry and would be helping along whatever they think is the necessary conditions to develop. I think Japan has not been that interfering in the development assistance planning. And I think maybe Yamada-san, you might like to come and tell me about this part, because it was the ministry itself is the one ministry that receives a lot of assistance from abroad, and also as well as does the planning of the country development work itself. And it is to experts to this ministry itself, which we have always had cooperation. But I don't think we, shall I say, we have certain cultural sensitivities that I think most of the Japanese people have. And we don't really push in whatever we think we believe in as clearly as some others do.
Yes, thank you very much. So during the 1990s, the Japanese government or the JICA did a lot of the cooperation for the infrastructure development. That is the characteristics of Japanese ODA to the Asia during the 1990s. But for the Egypt, they are, have to conduct the election, free and fair elections after the revolutions. So that's why the JICA dispatched the JICA experts who contribute to the inter-election for the free and fair election. That is the first step for the Egyptian state building. So that's why that is the, of course, we do the infrastructure development to the Egypt. But before the infrastructure development, intellectual contribution through fair and transparency election is the first thing important. That is the characteristic of our assistance to Egypt.
Régis Arnaud, Le Figaro. Mrs. Ogata, how do you, in your head, divide between the money you will give for assisting countries when the government of these countries have money but use it, for example, to finance the police that is beating the protester in their own country? How do you choose this? And also, if you allow me, because there are not so many questions, as a public figure, why don't you, I never heard you talking about the lack of refugee policy by Japan. Why don't you ever talk about it? Or do you?
I don't know. I have talked a lot about refugees and the lack of Japanese receiving refugees over the years. I was 10 years at High Commission for Refugees, and in the latest, I think, bulletin that the UNHCR published, I have a whole article about some of the progress that Japan has made, but some of the dissatisfaction. So I will make sure that you get this bulletin. Sorry. We just don't give money around. Development assistance is a much more complicated process of discussing with the recipient government over what they consider as the various plans, whether it is technical assistance. we do a lot of technical assistance, that is, training people so that they themselves can govern and they themselves can create and so on. So there's a lot of consultation between the government that receives our assistance and ourselves on what exactly are going to be the main areas of technical assistance. And very often the technical assistance areas move into various development programs that the country themselves have to be producing, whether it is industrial policy or regional policy or whatever. So it is always upon consultation that technical assistance, grant aid means buildings and things like that. And then also yen loan, soft loan too, which is over 10 years almost, that we would be given loans in a way that they themselves can do. So we don't give around, we're not Santa Claus.
Keiko Okabe from TBS. I have a question regarding to Syria. Like you said before, the situation is really intense in there, and a lot of refugees are now fleeing into Turkey. What's your view on that, and what do you think about Japanese government or JICA can do to solve these problems? Thank you.
Syria has received a lot of Iraqi refugees, and in that sense, it was one of the largest receiving and helping country for Syria, for Iraqi refugees, and they could go to school and get to the hospitals and so on. So JICA did give assistance to Syrian education authorities and also to the hospitals for the number of refugees they received to Iraq. Now, I don't know exactly whether the Iraqi refugees have stayed there right now or not, but we will. I have not heard any expulsion of refugees in Syria either, but the Syrian situation worries me a bit.
What about Syrian people fleeing into Turkey?
Yes. Well, I hope that if there's a danger that for refugees outflow, that the recipient countries would follow the convention of receiving refugees and give them asylum, at least until the conditions at home are safe enough. I hope very much. We've had Turkey has had a lot of experience, sometimes not as open as I would like to have them to be, and sometimes more generous. I don't know exactly about how much Syrian refugees they have received.
I don't see any hands up right now, so I would okay.
Takashi Koyama freelance. In the G8 in France, the United States, Britain, France, and Germany, and other European countries agreed to provide economic aid to Egypt and Tunisia, but your country were not, among the names to provide aid to these two countries. Were there any special reasons for this?
I don't know whether there was any. We do belong to the group of 8. 7, it used to be 7. So if there was a total agreement, I'm sure Japan was in it. And we have moved on with some concrete assistance already, but each country has done. I think there was a general agreement about assisting these refugees. But what exactly is the area in which they would extend their assistance and so on, I don't know. But Japan has gone on with some assistance already to both Syria and Egypt, and I think this is the action for assistance is something that has been agreed by among the aid as a overall assistance plan. But I don't think that they have to consult for every program or project. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't wish to sound at all cynical, but how genuine do you feel the desire is for democracy in these countries. You've been talking about Syria and Egypt, for instance. And how strong are the prospects for a soundly based democracy developing, which is rooted in systems as well as in popular uprisings?
Oh, I think these both Syria and Egypt people are very serious in wanting to have their voices heard and counted. And there was, in both countries, there are certain steps for opening up and development. I mean, they would demand education, they would demand better service from governments and so on. This was going on. But the overall governance structure with a very strong president dominating was something that there was a lot of dissatisfaction already, both in Egypt and in Tunisia, that I have witnessed too. And I think naturally, if people are educated better, they see more prospects for improving their conditions. And then, I mean, I did mention the number of freedom of press ranking when I just introduced my statement. These are very, very important signs. I mean, countries that may be developing, but if they're not opening their country up for the people, the ranking in terms of freedom of press usually is a very low one. And I think altogether, as the democracy moves on, there'll be more open the chances for people to express their views, and their views will be put into policy with the right kind of steps. I think there was a lot of progress in these countries, but they were not given the freedom to choose and to select their leaders and so on, and this was at the bottom of the problems.
And do you think the institutional structure will keep up with democracy from the
democracy will go zigzag through is the way I would look at it. I think the governments will realize that they cannot go back to what they were. And so, but at the same time, as Mr. Yamada said, some of the assistance we're giving to the development planning agency is to try to figure out certain rules and regulations that give certain opening for the people who want to have more self-governance and so on. So it's a bit of a slower step that actually will prove everything. But the direction is there, and I think this is probably what we're seeing in North Africa and the Middle East is probably almost a big revolutionary movement in the whole world.
Okay, then a question from my side. You explained a little bit about your role and the role of Japan in this region. Could you elaborate a little bit more why you think especially Egypt is turning to Japan for electoral support and economic planning, and what role can Japan play in the future, or what the government should play in the future to help the countries to develop?
I have to be honest, I was rather surprised that the planning agencies, the planning minister, I have known her quite well for a long time, that would ask, and Japan, I understand, is the only country to which they went for these experts for planning, for economic and social structures and institutions, as well as for the election observer. And there's one person who has gone to Tunisia too, but we have sent these election experts, election planning specialists to Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, and so on, when they were going through elections. So it's not a new thing that Japan has been doing, but to come from Egypt so soon after all these difficulties that came through was a bit of a surprise to me. And I feel that we should really live up to what we have been expected. So this election planning, and we have Mr. Shiratori-san, he is a professor, Tokai University, and is known for being a specialist in election process planning. And so he is quite willing to go. So this is a very early stage, and I must say I was rather pleasantly surprised is the honest response to your question.
And if future role of Japan? What role should Japan play, or can Japan play in the whole process in this region?
I think Japan can play. We were never had any country as a nominated anything, and so we have probably been a helpful partner, but never dominated. And I think that may be a good reason. Also in Egypt, as I said, the first thing that I noted, Egypt, going back history, Egyptians had a lot of expectations on Japan as being the country that, I would say, as an Asian country that really broke the Western domination and became a strong country. That kind of attitude, when you listen to some of the Egyptian intellectuals, and they were all moved by the Admiral, you've heard Boutros Ghali, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations. At his generation, they were all very much moved by Admiral Togo's victory in the Nippon-Japan-Syria War. And Mr. Boutros Ghali, whenever he came to Japan, would go to Togo Shrine. And I think our company did once, and that was the only time I went to the Togo Shrine. But there is that historical memory of Japan as the country that led the world from, what shall I say, Western domination to something of a Japan, strong Japan, and Asia coming up. So there's that historical kind of expectation among many Egyptian intellectuals. I think that is something that surprised me too. And I think there's a lot that we did together with Egypt. I mean, there's a big opera house there in Egypt. Also, the Egyptian Museum. I don't know how many. It's the most beautiful, wonderful museum, and JICA is doing a second round of the construction of the new museum. When this revolutionary development moved, there were some 500 Japanese tourists in Egypt, something like that, huge, because there's a lot of people who go to Egypt to look at their history. So there's always a kind of historical attraction to Japanese, if I make it a bit more dramatic. And so many Japanese tourists go to Egypt. And then the Egyptians are very highly intellectual leaders there. And higher education was something that they wanted to do a lot. There's the University of Cairo, which is a very big university. But the prime minister resigned this time. He's a businessman, IT specialist, and so on. He felt that IT is the way to develop in today's world. And he really wanted to have a highly advanced University of Science and Technology focusing on IT. And it was a very long-term negotiation that I came in at the tail end. But we were able to open this university in Alexandria last year. And I was able to get Japanese universities to come along. So Egypt is a country that has had this kind of expectation in a long-term collaboration with us. So in that sense, I'm very glad that they, after all this new development, that they still came to Japan to ask for this governing institutional assistance and so on. So I think we have to live up.
I see any hands up. Is there, yeah, third and fourth rounds, so don't be shy.
I can't resist asking this, although you'll think it's probably very mischievous, but I obviously respect everything you've just said, but does it worry you at all that Japan has such political instability at the top of government at the moment? When you're giving advice, for example, to Egypt, and you look at the fact that Japan has one prime minister a year, how do you square this with your advice on the merits of democracy?
I don't go around advising the government on democracy. They should know better, no? But you see, I don't, the kind of work we're doing, JICA is doing right now, whether it is in Egypt, technical assistance, soft loans and so on, I don't get any interference because we're doing within the overall range that the government has set up my JICA and so on. But I wish when I was High Commissioner for Refugees, I was there for 10 years, and there were 8 prime ministers. But there is one party had the 8 prime ministers. So this is not new. At the same time, the difference between the former years and today is that the bureaucracy was strong and considered to be usable, I would put it that way. And this is, so although there were 8 prime ministers, I think the country was kept along the line of strong bureaucracy, sometimes maybe too domineering, but able to have some continuity. But this time it is to try to change this bureaucratic system too, which has caused more confusion.